We hear a lot that there's no such thing as Islamophobia. I think even not just right-wingers say that. We see that on the media as well, apparently. So this is from Wales. You can see there's a swastika on one of them. It's actually, obviously, someone cares for this burial because there's flowers there. So BNP, UKIP, Kill the Muslims, Pakis. Pakis is a bit 1970s, and this was from Wales in 2013, so some things don't ever change. Okay, before I get into it, I just want to introduce something so that we can understand where everything fits in. And here's a quote from Marx. There's a quote from Marx in his German ideology. The ruling ideas are the ideas of the ruling class. And here's a quote from Baroness Vorsi, who was chair of the Conservative Party at one point. And she said, Islamophobia has now passed the dinner table test. So what I'm trying to explain with this slide is that it's not like a bunch of thugs out in the street. Islamophobia is coming top down. Okay, a phobia is an extreme irrational fear or hatred. Racism obviously is hatred of another group. Actually, there's no such thing as a race. Race is a completely human construct. But what we understand by racism is an in-group and an out-group. So racism is hatred of an out-group when you're in this in-group. So usually you believe that the one group is inferior. Sometimes you even believe that a particular group is superior as well. So anti-Semitism, obviously, it means hatred of Jews. I mean, Jews, not necessarily Semites. A lot of Palestinians are Semites. But we understand anti-Semitism to mean hatred of Jews. Xenophobia, of course, is hatred of foreigners. And similarly, Islamophobia is hatred of Muslims. So today, you can't say blacks are evil. I mean, you could say that 100 years ago, perhaps even less, but rightly unacceptable today. Though, of course, in practice, we've had the Windrush scandal. We've had huge numbers of deaths of black people in custody. I believe it's still the case that not a single police officer or prison officer has ever been sent to prison for the death of a black person. And obviously, black people are discriminated against in jobs, in education, and so on. Jews and Judaism is evil, again, rightly unacceptable. However, you can get away with calling Muslims evil or Islam evil. Why is that still acceptable? You can't openly hate black people, but there is a way to actually attack black people without hating black people. What you do is you devalue something that is linked to black people, like their culture, so their music, or their religion, or their language, or their clothes. And there's another way to attack people. You can attack a group by using science, or literature, or arts, or philosophy. So it's always about an in-group and an out-group. So I'm going to talk about 5 pillars of Islamophobia. I went to an Islamophobia talk by MEND at the university a few years ago. And it was a nice talk. MEND are a good organization that try and encourage Muslims to be active in politics and in the community. But they didn't mention the word Israel once. So I'm going to start with Israel. And most of my slides are about this Israel connection. So here's an ad that was on in San Francisco buses, in the New York subway, from about 2012. It says, in any war between the civilized man and the savage, support the civilized man, support Israel, defeat jihad. So they originally didn't want to, they actually weren't going to allow this ad to appear on their buses, but the organization that was pushing the ad threatened to take them to court, and as a public body, they couldn't risk being fined huge amounts of money. Anyway, there's a lot of tropes in there. You've got civilized versus savage. We're back into colonialism and imperialism, really. And it's classic colonial racism. So we've had racism before. I mean, this is from the United States, of course. So we've had, in the US, you've had racism before against immigrants. So you've had, when the Irish went over, there was racism against the Irish. When the Jews went over, there was racism against the Jews. When the Italians went over, obviously there was racism against the Italians. In fact, I believe the biggest number of deaths in one incident of lynching was against Italians, and racism against the Chinese as well. However, racism has not previously been used in the service of a foreign country. So this was organized by someone called Geller. She's actually, interestingly enough, she's a US Jewish supporter of the EDL, and her close associate, Robert Spencer. Now, it's not just the US, because they have links to a UK think tank, supposedly, called Policy Exchange. So Policy Exchange are very famous because they produced an anti-Muslim, anti-Islamic report, and they sent it around the media. Most of the media published it and talked about it. They also sent it to Newsnight. Newsnight investigated a little bit more than the other newspapers and media, and they found that the receipts in the report, which were supposedly for bad books and sold by a bookshop associated with a mosque, were completely fake. So that's the way it goes. You can use lies to generate Islamophobia. Okay, here's someone called Stephen Lennon. Stephen Yaxley Lennon sometimes. The Lennon tells you that he has Irish descent. So that's why he calls himself Tommy Robinson instead. So on the top left, there he is in an Israeli flag at an a pro-genocide demo against the anti-genocide demos. Top right, he's there wearing a T-shirt for the Israeli army. The guy next to him is wearing a T-shirt for Mossad. You can just about make Mossad out there. And he's actually had pictures of himself wearing that similar T-shirt as well. And in the bottom picture, he's got a gun there. He's wearing flip-flops, as you normally do when you're out going into a war. He's standing on an Israeli tank. And interestingly enough, he's in the occupied Golan Heights, which is actually Syrian territory, no matter what Donald Trump says. Oh, there he is again. Puts up a video, and he says, if there was a war and it kicked off, I would be there on the front line fighting for Israel. There you go, Tommy Robinson, EDL, English Defence League. So even The Guardian did a report a few years ago about the hidden financial backers of the EDL. So they reported that $60,000 for legal fees and demonstrations came to the EDL from the pro-Israel Middle East Forum. That's not all. £60,000 salary came to Tommy Robinson or Stephen Lennon from the pro-Israel Robert Shillman via a group called Rebel Media in Canada. And an undisclosed sum of money from pro-Israel Australian Liberty Alliance. He also had support from the pro-Israel Gatestone Institute. We'll come to some of these a bit later. And the pro-Israel David Horowitz Centre. Okay, on the left, you can see, if you go onto the gov.uk website and you go and look up the company information for the EDL, English Defence League, English Defence League Limited, you go down to the bottom and you can see highlighted down there, the English from 2011 to 2014, the name was changed from the English Defence League to the English and Jewish Defence League. So the Jewish Defence League was originally in America, and they were banned as a terrorist organization because they were organized by an extremist rabbi called Kahan. And if you're aware of some of the ministers in Netanyahu's government, they're basically disciples of that Rabbi Kahan. On the right, I've taken a little clip of the key people from that. That's from the Wikipedia page. And two of them are quite interesting. There's Alan Lake, and the highlighted guy is Paul Ray. And that's a picture of Paul Ray. So he's a co-founder of the EDL. He spied for Mossad. He infiltrated the ISM, International Solidarity Movement. So the ISM, if you remember Rachel Corrie, who was killed by an Israeli bulldozer, she was a member of ISM. She was the American girl. And there was Tom Herndl, and he was also ISM. ISM originally came to prominence because the Israeli army would shoot at ambulances. So ISM would ride in the ambulances to try and prevent Israel from shooting at those ambulances. And that seemed to work for a while until they killed Rachel Corrie and Tom Herndl. So he infiltrated the ISM and then reported back to his Israeli masters. Another guy who funded the EDL is called Alan Lake. He's a millionaire. He's also a Zionist. Some members of the BNP joined the EDL, but some members didn't. And the ones who didn't are rather more rude about Alan Lake than I am here. Okay, some of the most extreme newspapers have fanatic loyalty to Israel. So here's Richard Desmond, who's the owner of the Daily Star. And this is a clip from a newspaper that's sometimes in the headlines. It's called the Jewish Chronicle. And they wrote an article about the EDL's most significant Jewish recruit, referring to Richard Desmond. Because that picture there is the front page of a Star newspaper edition, English Defence League to become political party. So he was basically putting his support at the Daily Star. He also owns the Express, by the way, behind the EDL. So even the Jewish Chronicle thought that was a step too far. But of course, we have to remember that all Jews do not support the murder and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. So when I first did this presentation in Edinburgh, I'd met people from IJAN, International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, and they were quite active at that point. And JVP was around then, but JVP has just exploded in the United States, Jewish Voice for Peace. They're huge, they're really big. If you look at the demonstrations, many of them are organized by JVP. So it's just a few years the organization has grown. Young Jewish people are realizing that you can't be anti-racist and then support a racist country. That's not anti-racism. So that's, if you like, on the left. On the right, conservative people like conservative Orthodox rabbis like Natura Carter do not support Israel. In fact, if you've been on any of the demos in London, you'll see rabbis from Natura Carter with their anti-Israel banners. I've taken photos of them myself. You have, Jewish people, you can divide them into Zionists, non-Zionists. Non-Zionists don't have any care about Israel. They're neither for nor against it. It's got nothing to do with them. Anti-Zionists are specifically against Israel. They feel that Israel is exploiting Jewishness. Okay, Israel and the far right, Pegida. Pegida started a few years ago. There were some big demos in Germany, so I've taken a clip on YouTube. There's a Pegida Dresden demo, and you can see there's German flags, but there's also an Israeli flag. I don't know if you could see it. Can you see it here? This is old-fashioned. Do with the finger. I need a stick. Okay, so you get Israeli flags at the Dresden demo. That was in 2015. And they had another demo in Germany as well. And they actually brought in an Israeli speaker. So you could see there the Israeli flag, and that's the Israeli speaker there. So that was at the Frankfurt rally. That was also in 2015. And by the way, after Tommy Robinson left the EDL, he started a Pegida UK, but it didn't really take off. So he tried to jump onto that bandwagon as well. So you may think it's odd that Jewish people would be allying with the most extreme right-wingers in Germany. Can you believe it? But history has a way of repeating itself. There's a book called 51 Documents by Lenny Brenner, and he has, as the name suggests, 51 documents about Zionist collaboration with people like Nazis and other far-right people. Okay, I found this as a TEDx talk from Melissa Boynan, and she said at one point in her talk, I was harboring a number of uninformed opinions about Muslims and Islam, and I think it was directly related to cultural Judaism in my upbringing, where I had assumed an objective truth in Zionist ideals, and therefore Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims were some type of objective enemy. It is quite obvious. If you're a supporter of Israel, then most Palestinians, 90% of Palestinians are Muslim, 10% are Christian. So you're going to target Palestinians, obviously, because you don't want them in your country. You're going to target the surrounding countries, so that's Arabs. And you're going to target Muslims, because 90% of Palestinians are Muslims. It's not a surprise. So here's something from the Times of Israel about a rabbi in France. He was a pro-Israel rabbi. His name's Zion Sardoun. He was a teacher at a Jewish school. And then he claimed that Muslims slashed him shouting anti-Jewish slogans. So that's all very well. The police investigated. The police, the doctors, and forensics found that he had actually cut himself. He was given a 6-month suspended sentence in the French court in 2016. Obviously, no one is telling him to do that. He just feels that to support Israel, he has to attack Muslims and Arabs. Strangely enough, in exactly the same year, there was another pro-Israel Jewish teacher, Stefan Arul, He invented a story of an attack by Muslims at a nursery school. Hospital found that the scratches were self-inflicted, yet again. He confessed to making up the story to spread hatred of Muslims. Okay, let's look at the Jewish Chronicle. You'd imagine it's my favorite newspaper. There's some number of times I've got clippings from it. So here's a title. After Christchurch, I was disgusted by the Islamophobia I saw in the Jewish community. By the way, what happened in Christchurch? There was a mosque that was, a gunman came in and shot a whole bunch of people. So, I have to put my glasses on to read this. On Friday, we woke up to the horrifying news of shootings at 2 mosques in Christchurch. But by lunchtime, people in our community were using Islamophobic tropes as they argued in Jewish Facebook groups. It's hard to imagine a more undignified or shameful spectacle. And then there was another group called Jewish Britain. For the uninitiated, Jewish Britain, with its 7,600 members, is one of the biggest and best-known Facebook groups of the community. It's also known to attract anti-Muslim commentary. And it was not just Jewish Britain. The Glasgow Friends of Israel, GFI group, which has more than 4,000 followers, was forced to remove a post about the Christchurch attack after it attracted a raft of nasty comments. This was quite an amusing comment that he picked out. Jews have empathy with humanity, whatever the race or religion they are. Hate is not instilled into them like some other peoples. So no trace of irony in spreading hate then. Okay, 2019, Katie Hopkins gets warm reception as she calls Islam single biggest threat. Mrs. Hopkins, who is notorious for describing refugees as cockroaches and asking about a final solution. And it's not just actually Katie Hopkins. There was Ms. Atkinson. She made headlines in 2014 for referring to the Thai-born wife of a UKIP supporter as a ting-tong. She and the party's then leader, Nigel Farage, later apologised. Also, there was Ross Pine. These are all people who were at that meeting, by the way. Ross Pine was suspended from the Board of Deputies for describing Muslims as the vilest of animals. She bragged about her record-breaking sanction. And Anne-Marie Waters, founder of anti-Islam political party For Britain, was on a list of attendees read out before the film. So they were showing a film. So Jewish Chronicle reporter Ben Weich was there to hear the mostly Jewish members praise the right-wing agitator. Right-wing agitator Katie Hopkins' words were not delivered to a meeting of the BNP in Barking, but to the sympathetic ears of a roomful of Jewish people in the heart of northwest London. Now, to be fair, they also had an article by Sir Mick Davies, Our Fight Against Bigotry Cannot Be Fought Alongside Bigots Like Katie Hopkins. I mean, you don't have to be, anyone with 2 grey cells to rub together and who's Jewish would realise that working with right-wing fanatics like the EDL or Katie Hopkins is the most stupid thing you can do, because although they might be targeting Muslims today, they will target tomorrow Jews, blacks, anyone that's different. I mean, it's obvious, but at least there was an article about it. These people are not our friends. Once they're done with Muslims, they will turn their attention to us. For them, difference is intolerable and something to be feared and vilified. Seeking common cause is a cynical ploy, and sometimes the misguided and foolish are taken in. So Sir Mick Davies is former chairman of the Jewish Leadership Council, a very pro-Israel organisation, and the CEO of the Conservative Party. So they have that, and then suddenly they've got Melanie Phillips in 2019, don't fall for bogus claims of Islamophobia. So Melanie Phillips, if you don't know, she's very famous amongst Muslims, is a fanatical Israel supporter. She called Independent Jewish Voices, that's a group of liberal Jews, and some of them were anti-Zionist and some of them are sort of less anti-Zionist. She called them Jews for genocide. I mean, that's classic projection.
Genocide of?
So she means genocide, Jews for genocide of Jews, meaning Israel. And she's been she's not nobody, because she's been a columnist at The Guardian, The Observer, The New Statesman, The Mail, The Times, The Spectator, and she's regularly on the BBC. And by the way, Anders Breivik, who is the guy who murdered a whole bunch of Norwegian children, the Norwegian mass murderer, he quoted Melanie Phillips in his manifesto, amongst others. Okay, I want to talk about the CAA, Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, and Gideon Falter, who was the chief executive. So they brought out a thing called British Muslims and Anti-Semitism, Analysis and Response in 2016. Basically, they're targeting Muslims. They're smearing a whole religion, and they have that thing on the front. So how can you complain about racism when you support the JNF? I mean, he's vice chair of the JNF. The JNF has taken land which was stolen from Palestinians by the state, and that land can never be used by or sold to a non-Jew. That's pure racism. And then they target Muslims, so they say, Muslims are apparently racist. It's racist, Islamophobic profiling from the CAA. Okay, let's turn to Alan Mendoza, who's executive director of the Henry Jackson Society. There's someone who calls herself a journalist, but she's a pretty extreme nutter. Anyway, I've covered her up mostly because I'm telling you who Alan Mendoza is. He's UK Vice Chair of JNF, Friends of Israel Initiative, the Israeli Diaspora Trust, and the Jewish Leadership Council, which we heard of just before. So, a Henry Jackson Society co-founder, Matthew Jameson, here's a quote. A far-right, deeply anti-Muslim, racist organization has relentlessly demonized Muslims and Islam, done everything in its power to foment an anti-Muslim attitude among the British population and political policy-making elites. I mean, that's the co-founder of the HJS, talking about the HJS. Okay, I mean, some of these names are a little bit old, so what I was pointing out was that the people who are known for being Islamophobic in the Labour Party, they're all Labour Friends of Israel. Bringing it up to date, 2/5 of Keir Starmer's cabinet, this is from Declassified UK, 2/5 of Keir Starmer's cabinet have been funded by pro-Israel lobbyists, and Labour MPs have accepted over 280,000 from the Israel lobby. I'll show later on that this is peanuts compared to what you can get if you're an American. Here's a clip from The Guardian. Keir Starmer urged to return donations from an Islamophobic property developer. So this guy, David Abrahams, he's an ex-treasurer of Labour Friends of Israel, vice chair Jewish Labour Movement. He stopped his donations under Corbyn, surprise, surprise, and he restarted them once Keir Starmer appeared. He supports interfaith as, quote, bringing non-Jewish people together for Israel. It's not what I thought interfaith was about, but anyway. He had a tweet, Palestinians chose race terrorism. I mean, that's such a cheek. If you know anything about the history of Palestine and Israel, you know about the Stern Gang, the Irgun, the Haganah, the murder of the UN.
If you click it, it comes up.
Yeah. He also said most black South Africans preferred white rule as it was less corrupt and more viable and professional. So he's actually got a bit of cheek to complain about corruption, because he secretly gave £700,000 to Blair's Labour via his secretary and his builder. Okay, some of his tweets are quite funny. So Muslim, we don't spell Muslim like that anymore, but anyway, communities have mixed loyalties. Oh, right, so if you know about the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, you know very well that Jews are not supposed to have mixed loyalties. Conservative Muslim culture is inherently violent. Muslim youth have a propensity for violence. And I mean, we know Israel is the most violent country in the world almost. So Israel's supporters trying to complain about the violence of other people is just ridiculous. He wanted to ban foreign imams, but of course you don't want to ban Israeli rabbis or South African white, apartheid supporting South African priests. Okay, I'm on Labour's executive committee. Our party needs an inquiry into Islamophobia. This is from Mish Rahman. He's on the NEC. And Keir Starmer has supported Israel's wars. He's seen by many to justify Israel's commands. We'll talk about this a bit later. A diktat was sent to MPs, councillors and local parties telling them not to attend demonstrations in support of Palestinian human rights. I don't know why it's called Palestinian human rights, actually. It's anti-genocide, anti-Holocaust. We should all be against that. Isn't that what we were told? Never again. A pro-Starmer NEC member waved good riddance to a Muslim Oxford councillor, also an NHS doctor, who worked through the pandemic. An unnamed party official allegedly responded to Muslims resigning by telling Jewish News political editor Lee Harpin that Labour was shaking off the fleas. So you're comparing Muslims to fleas. We've seen that rhetoric before in the 1930s. Okay, let's carry on. And there's the tweets. I'll speed up a bit here. Okay, Keir Starmer, I think it's pretty obvious. Even Nick Ferrari, who interviewed him, couldn't believe what he was hearing. Is a siege appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water? Israel does have that right. We stand by Israel. And then the next week, I was not saying Israel had the right to cut off water, food, fuel, or medicine. He must think we're an idiot. Today, on the internet, you can just go and see him saying exactly what he claims. 1 week later, he wasn't saying. And he also told Jewish News that he was a Zionist without qualification. I support Zionism without qualification. So, again, Trevor Phillips, another notorious Islamophobe. If you're a Muslim, you know very well he's an Islamophobe. And he was suspended from the Labour Party for his Islamophobia and then whipped back in without any investigation being completed. He actually said, ignore protests that the Conservative Party should be investigated for Islamophobia. Those making them should be ashamed. They are aiding and abetting anti-Semitism. So apparently if you complain about the Islamophobia in the Tory party, you're anti-Semitic. And actually, that was in July 2019. In May 2019, the Muslim Council of Britain found 150 cases of Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. They put it in a report and sent it to the Conservatives, and everyone knew about it at the time. So, I mean, Phillips is talking rubbish. He also made a pretty Islamophobic program, and Peter Oborne, who's a right-wing journalist, but seems to be quite a decent journalist, an honest journalist, he resigned, I think, from the Telegraph because they were killing stories because one of their advertisers was against one of their advertisers. Anyway, the double standards of Trevor Phillips. If you are determined to attack British Muslims for their religious beliefs, and that was referring to Phillips' 2016 Channel 4 TV program, What British Muslims Really Think, you must surely be consistent and criticise other religions as well. Phillips could have carried out a similar poll of Conservative Party activists, of Roman Catholics, of Orthodox Jews, or many other religious minorities, and come up with something roughly similar. I mean, Oborne is a practicing Christian, actually, so he's certainly well aware of similar attitudes. And of course, in the 2024 general election, Faiza Shaheen was deselected. She was interviewed on Newsnight. The complaints were made by the Jewish labour movement. Basically, you had to trawl through 10 years of tweets. And she said, a tweet about Islamophobia in Labour. How am I not allowed to talk about my experiences of Islamophobia and the double standards that I've seen? So, if you complain about Islamophobia in the Tory party, you're an anti-Semite. If you complain about Islamophobia in the Labour Party, you get kicked out. And she also tweeted a skit by the American comedian Jon Stewart, who used to be on The Daily Show. I think he's back there, actually, now. And anyway, it was a skit about the Israel lobby. But actually, I mean, although the first part was about Israeli nutters, the second part was an attack on Hamas as well. So he tried to, you have to balance it these days. Anyway, she liked that tweet. And he said, this is the dumbest thing the UK has done since electing Boris Johnson. Well, and she was replaced as a prospective MP by someone who was a member of the Jewish labour movement. So there you go, it goes back to the beginning. Okay, there was a conference in Jerusalem called Islam, British Society and the Terrorist Threat. And there's Melanie Phillips again. And, okay, there's a few more people there. This is from a book, The Making and Unmaking of a Zionist. The Making and Unmaking of a Zionist by Anthony Lerman. So he wanted some money for his Jewish project. And he went to see Lord Calms, who's the former Tory party treasurer and boss of Dixon's. So they wanted money for a project on monitoring EU policymaking on issues affecting Jews in Europe. So Anthony Lerman is Jewish. He was a Zionist. He went to Israel, worked in, was in a... he actually, I think he even served in the Israeli army at one point, but now he's turned and he's become an anti-Zionist. Anyway, there was only one interest that European Jews needed to pursue in Europe, Calms said: Islam and Islamic fundamentalism. What JPR, that's Lerman's organisation, should be doing is fighting Islam, showing complete support for the two people who had stood up to Islam, Tony Blair and George Bush. Okay, the Southern Poverty Law Centre produced a report called Field Guide to Anti-Muslim Extremists. So they basically looked at the top 15 Islamophobes. And I discussed some of them, and we've mentioned some of them already. 14 out of those 15 are very pro-Israel. So it's not really a coincidence. 5 or 6 are Jewish, and Jews, of course, only make up about 2% of the population in the US. One's a Greek Orthodox, one's a Catholic, one's a Maronite, one's an evangelical, though it's suspected that he's actually doing it for the money. 2 are some type of Christian. One's a white racist. That's the one that I couldn't find any evidence of her pro-Israel stand. One's an atheist, and one's a Muslim. So the Muslim used to be in the Quillam Foundation.
Are you on 2 yet?
Hmm?
Are you on
No, I'm still on 1.
Yeah, you've got to go.
Okay, NUMEC. This is how Israel got its nuclear weapons. It was funded by Richard Dickey Scaife and the Stern family. And then if you look up Forbes and you find the Center for Security Policy, you find that it's been funded by Richard Mellon Scaife. So the Center for Security Policy, CSP, is very Islamophobic. So the same guy who funded to get nuclear-grade material, nuclear weapons-grade material to Israel, is also funding the CSP. And this is the Center for Security Policy. The guy on the left is Gaffney. The guy on the right is Yerushalmi. So, Gaffney, Obama, his quotes are quite funny. Obama would have to be considered America's first Muslim president. And AIPAC, which is an American-Israel PAC, gave $60,000 to this guy. And he's also a contributing expert or author to extremist Israeli think tanks at the Ariel Center for Policy Research. So Mort Klein, president of the Zionist Organization of America, which is the oldest pro-Israel organization in America, told The Forward, which is a Jewish newspaper, Frank Gaffney is one of the most fervent, articulate, pro-Israel Zionists who I've ever known. As a friend of Israel, there is no one better. And the guy on the right supports the settlers. He's an Orthodox Jew. It's, again, another funny quote, but okay, we haven't got time for that. There was another report called Fear Inc., and what they did was they divided the funders from the misinformation experts or the Islamophobes. So the funders provide the money for these misinformation experts. And if you look at Norwegian terrorist Anders Breivik manifesto, he references Robert Spencer 165 times. So he's 1, 2, 3, the 4th one down. Yeah. And that's the guy with the ads, by the way, that I started with. He referenced Pamela Geller 12 times, and she was also involved in that ad that I started with. Frank Gaffney, CSP, we were just talking about, 9 times, and also David Horowitz from the so-called Freedom Center. And Stephen Emerson from the IPT, this guy here also was mentioned. But these are the funders, so they couldn't do anything without this funding. And these Jewish foundations are there to advance, according to their own words, Jewish and Israeli causes. So you've got the Russell Berry Foundation, the Becker Foundation, William Rosenwald Foundation, and the Fairbrook. So the Jewish heiress, Nina Rosenwald, is the founder and president of the Gatestone Institute, and she's been called just sugar mama of anti-Muslim hate because she gives so much money to spreading anti-Muslim hatred. Nearly 11 million between 2010 and 2015. Here's the genocide. This is 650K to Daniel Pipes. This is Daniel Pipes, founded the Middle East Forum, who funded EDL's Tommy Robinson. Some of his quotes, if the Palestinians give up, they would gain more than the Israelis. So if the Palestinians give up their homes, their farms, their land, they will gain more than the Israelis. I don't really know how that works. And another quote, when Israel hammered Gaza in 2014, some brutality we hadn't seen until this current genocide. He said, the civilized and moral forces of Israel came off well in this face-off with barbarianism. In that time, over 2,000 Palestinians were killed, over 500 children, targeting of civilian homes. 83 schools, 10 hospitals destroyed in 2014. Okay, Steve Emerson of the IPT, that was something I mentioned before. Here's a guy from CARE. They were actually spying on these Muslim organizations. Actually, if you know your history, you know that some pro-Israel organizations spied on black civil rights movement as well. But anyway, today they're spying on Muslims, Muslim organizations. So, in addition to CARE, Muslim organizations and leaders surveilled or spied on by IPT include the then Congressman Keith Ellison, the Part 51 Community Center, Muslim Alliance of North America, Islamic Society of North America, and a whole bunch of other. Even Zaytuna College, which is totally non-political. The guy from Zaytuna College went to speak to George W. Bush after the September 11th attacks. So it's not a particularly extreme organization. And Steve Emerson is famous for saying, and in Britain, it's not just no-go zones, there are actual cities like Birmingham that are totally Muslim, when non-Muslims just simply don't go in. That's quite funny. So, of course, he has links to Israeli intelligence officers, and he's a propagandist. David Horowitz, another fanatic Israeli supporter, his quote is, "The Palestinians are Nazis. Every one of their elected officials are terrorists." That is a really funny statement to make when you think of people like Begin, who was the leader of the terrorist organization Irgun. He had that organization killed 2 British prisoners of war, hanged their bodies, and booby-trapped them so that when someone came to cut them down, the bomb exploded and injured him as well. They killed a UN, a guy from the UN, Lord Falk, who'd actually saved like 20,000 Jewish people from German prisoner of war camps. Anyway, Israel apparently is always the perennial victim, no matter what it does. Okay, so in America you have AIPAC, and it has, as we've seen now, quite a lot of influence. So this is an interview in the New Yorker with one of the people who used to be leader of AIPAC. And he said, so Findley was someone who didn't support Israel, a congressman who didn't support Israel. So he said, he beat Findley with a lot of help from Jews, in-state and out of state. Now, how did the Jewish money find him? I traveled around the country talking about how we had the opportunity to defeat someone unfriendly to Israel, and the gates opened. So that was early on. Later on, he also spoke to this guy, Rosen, and he said, you see this napkin? In 24 hours, we could have the signatures of 70 senators on this napkin. 17 million. This is their website, actually. They're quite honest about it.
Where are you now?
AIPAC mainstreams Muslim hate. Okay.
You're not even. Keep going.
Keep going.
Keep going. You're not at number 2 yet.
No.
No, keep going.
Okay.
That's it.
Reinventing fascism. Okay, fascism's traditional targets were blacks and Jews, but they've been replaced because the right attacks Muslims with impunity. The reality is that Muslim is really a code word for blacks, Jews, and anyone else who's different. It's quite obvious that you can't get away with attacking black people or Jewish people. So if you're a fascist or neo-Nazi, then you need a code word, and you can attack Muslims. So that's what they do. So that's why people like Anders Breivik, who's basically a fascist, he's also a Zionist. Geert Wilders, he's now been elected. Marine Le Pen in France, Golden Dawn was in Israel. Ron Liddell, writing in The Spectator. The Spectator is a horrible magazine these days. I mean, it's like where the most extreme right-wing nutters, instead of retiring, they go and write for The Spectator. Why Boris is wrong about burqas. So Rod Liddell used to be the producer of the Radio 4 program, the Today. It's one of the most listened to programs on the radio. And he said, my own view is that there's not nearly enough Islamophobia within the Tory party. So the EDL, here's a picture, there's the Jewish rabbi. This is one of their marches. So obviously, again, opposed by UAF, Jews for Justice for Palestine, and anti-Zionist Orthodox rabbis of the Neturei Karta and so on. Funded by a Middle East Forum. So apart from the US rabbi that they brought in, the leader of the EDL Jewish division, so the EDL had a Jewish division led by Roberta Moore. She's Brazilian. She's a member. She had served in the Israeli army, and she was asked. Actually, that's why I put this headline here: "Who is using who?" She was asked in an interview. I think it was with Haaretz, which is an Israeli newspaper. They said, "Aren't they using you?" And she said, "Yeah, but to be honest, it's more like we're using them." And again, we've talked about Pamela Geller. She was one of the woman who was involved in the ads. How I wish I could be there to stand with the English Defence League. And there she is, next to Tommy Robinson. And I mean, here's an EDL guy with this Hitler salute. So this really is about members of the BNP who went on and joined the EDL. So Peter Feher, the BNP's Luton organizer, urged BNP supporters to attend the demos on 13th April, but asked supporters not to wear any BNP badges if you plan on going. Dunstable BNP activists, Lawrence Jones, Chris Mitchell, a young BNP Bedfordshire organizer. These guys were all joined the EDL. Okay, one of the ways that I don't want to address too many things about attacks on Muslims, but one of the things that the right wing especially say, they talk about street grooming gangs, Asian grooming gangs, Paki grooming gangs, Muslim grooming gangs. Okay, so you probably know these three people. I hope you do. They're quite famous. Anyway, notorious, I should say. Jimmy Savile, Prince Andrew, Rolf Harris. Here's a few more. You may not know these people. So, Sir Cyril Smith, MP, Lord Greville Janner, the obnoxious Zionist, actually. I remember when there was a massacre in Jenin, he said, oh, no, nothing happened there. Sir Clement Freud, MP. I used to enjoy listening to him on Just a Minute. I thought it was really good. A bit unfortunate. Sir Peter Heyman, head of MI6. In fact, so obviously all these people are either rapists or pedophiles. The concern about him was that foreign government would find out and blackmail him, not the fact that he was abusing children. Peter Morrison, MP, Deputy Chair of the Tory Party. And there's a bunch more. So that's Hugh Edwards, who's in the news just at the moment. Then there's Max Clifford, who's a publicist. You may not, if you're too young, you may not know him. But he thought up that fantastic headline, "Ate my hamster." Freddie Starr ate my hamster. So he was a publicist. He's in the news. Stuart Hall, again, I used to watch It's a Knockout, and I used to, watch people making fools of themselves, laughing alongside Stuart Hall. And, of course, Gary Glitter. So the reality is most child sex abuse is by white British males, 84%. The highest child abuse, by far, is actually in the family. The second most child abuse is online. And the third most common child abuse is in institutions like schools, churches, and sports clubs. The smallest group is street grooming, and that's what the right are always talking about. There was actually a paedophile group which was funded for 3 years by the Home Office, Paedophile Information Exchange, between 1977. And it's supported by the National Council for Civil Liberties as well. Okay, here we have hundreds of thugs linked to the EDL attempt to burn down the Southport Mosque. So 9 Muslims were trapped inside. Plainclothes officers were forced to take refuge. Then on the 2nd of August, Quilliam Mosque in Liverpool. I think this has been in the news, so I'm going to skip over this. Okay, so there has been Islamophobia on the left as well. There's a Eurocentric culture of superiority. I think maybe it's partly to do with colonialism as well. But racism has been justified by philosophers and scientists from colonial times onwards. So, French philosopher Pascal Brackner, English writer Martin Amis, Keenan Malik, who's a BBC radio presenter. Someone said, I am an Islamophobe and proud of it. She wrote that in one of the newspapers. That's Polly Toynbee. She wrote it in The Independent. And she also writes for The Guardian. Someone said, haven't read the Quran, so couldn't quote chapter and verse like I can for the Bible, but often say Islam greatest force for evil today. Any ideas who said that? Richard Dawkins. I really love that quote because he's supposed to be a scientist. And the thing with science is that you come up with any crazy idea, but then you have to do an experiment to prove it. So I like that quote because he actually says in the first half, I don't know anything about Islam. And in the second half, he goes on to say, oh, it's the greatest force for evil in the world. I mean, you couldn't say anything more stupid.
He's an atheist.
He's an atheist. It's funny because, he came to prominence by attacking Christianity.
That's right, yeah, that's right.
But apparently he's quite happy with Christianity and hates Islam more. I just want to address one other thing as well. Racism, human freedom. Look, black people do not object to jokes. but they do object to racist jokes and racist abuse. I mean, that's an Agatha Christie book, which I read a long time ago. You can't put that title out now. That's not about freedom of speech. That's about abuse. In exactly the same way, Muslims do not object to criticism. In fact, if you go to most mosque libraries, you have books about Islam by non-Muslims. But Muslims do object to abuse, lies, and demonization. So, there is a history of abusive cartoons. It's not just Charlie Hebdo today attacking Muslims. Der Stürmer was by a Nazi magazine. It was published by a guy called Julius Streicher. It was a scandal sheet. People would phone in stories about what bad things that Jews had done. And I think most of them were true. But you're only printing the bad things. You're never printing the good things. So it's like a normal curve. You know, just like if you go to a classroom and measure kids' heights, you're going to have something in the middle and something at the ends. If you only measured the heights and said, oh, all the kids are midgets, that's not a true reflection of the classroom. In the same way, if you're only ever printing bad stories about Jews, that's not a true reflection of the Jewish people. But it affects people. And it was actually banned at one point in Nazi Germany because he attacked the Christian communion. Okay, cartoons by Phipps. So Phipps used to draw for Der Stürmer. A Phipps Jew was short, fat, ugly, unshaven, drooling, sexually perverted, bent-nosed with pig-like eyes. You know, what I wanted to do in this slide was actually take a picture from Der Stürmer and take a picture from Charlie Hebdo. But the Charlie Hebdo pictures are so obscene that I can't really do that. Anyway, the Allies executed Streicher after World War II. And he, of course, wasn't a member of the army, didn't pick up a gun and fight, didn't kill anyone. But they executed him because of his magazine, Der Stürmer. Okay, so we often get attacks on the Quran. It's pretty obvious. I mean, there's nothing amazing here. Just use a reliable translation. Don't use a translation that Muslims don't accept. So there are plenty. There's a guy called Mahmoud Pickthall, obviously a Muslim convert, Yusuf Ali, Muhammad Asad, that's my favorite translation. And they tend to use like biblical language because it's more religious. But there are modern translations as well, Abdul Halim, Clear Quran. So many of the tracks, what happens is that they just take a verse out of context, or even a part of the verse out of context. And all you have to do is go and read the verse before and after. Sometimes just read the whole verse. So there's a quote from a Muslim scholar. I mean, he's not a modern scholar. He died in 1350. Islamic law is all justice, kindness, and the common good. No opposing interpretation is acceptable. He means no literal interpretation is acceptable. So I just want to give you a quick example of context. So someone said, kill a German every time you see one. Actually, it was a Russian guy. So does that mean Russians were told to go around the world to find German babies and German women and kill them? Well, look at the context. First of all, when was it said? It was said between August 1942 and February 1943. So immediately you realize, oh, World War II, that was between 1939 and 1945. So that was said during World War II. Where was it said? It was actually said in Stalingrad. In 1941, Nazi Germany invaded Russia. Stalingrad is 1,000 miles inside Russia. And the Battle of Stalingrad was the turning point of World War II. So clearly you can put two and two together. You work out that, oh, it's talking about a battle. So context is everything. And actually, kill a German every time you see one. Well, here's pictures of German prisoners of war from Stalingrad. So you can't even take it literally because it didn't mean kill every German soldier that is attacking Russia, invading Russia in Stalingrad, because if they surrendered, you take them as prisoners of war. So you've got to be careful with taking things out of context. I was going to say something like, some idiot people think that Blair is an honest man. Now, I just said Blair is an honest man. If you take that out of context, you can swap the meaning completely 180 degrees. Okay, and the fourth thing I want to talk about is we've been through the Afghan-Iraq wars, and we're in a situation where Israel is supported by the media and our government and the previous government. So you demonize the other side, and then that means it's an attack on our human rights. But also elections use the race card. So the famous example of that is Phil Woolas, who was a Labour MP. He was going to lose his seat to a Lib Dem, I think. So he used Islamophobia and lies to win the seat at the election. And the quotes, some of the quotes are, make white people angry, so that they would vote for him, not the other guy. Galvanize the white sun vote. It's a very patronizing expression, but anyway. So he actually did, I mean, it worked. He defeated the Lib Dem. He was behind the Lib Dem candidate before the polling day. But because of this racist rhetoric, he won that by-election, won that election. However, because he'd lied as well, not because of his racism, but because of his lies, he was taken to court. There's a court that you can take people to in terms of election. And so the court said he was basically kicked out and the seat was awarded to the Lib Dem candidate. Okay, so, you know, you had a slew of, here it was Labour MPs who were, you know, broadcasting their dislike of the Muslim community. And BBC News, I mean, if anyone has watched the BBC News, news headlines, it's just disgusting. It's like, you know, Palestinians die. It's not like Israel bombs them to death. The language is so bad. And, you know, I just happened to hear this particular Radio 3 news report at 8 o'clock in the morning about ISIS fighters on refugee boats from Libya. And there's no evidence for it, just completely invented story. So, you know, some politicians do whip up anti-Muslim feelings for political war and gain. Here's an ex-Labour Home Secretary, you may remember, Blunkett in Blair's cabinet. I agree with the far right on Muslims. How can you imagine? How can you actually say that? Even if you believe that, you shouldn't say something like that. It's ridiculous. And the fifth example of Islamophobia is some Muslims push Islamophobia because there's money in it. So some Muslims work with Islamophobes, and there's plenty of money available for the right soundbite. So if you take the EDL, and there's another group called Cheerleaders, which are associated with the EDL, and there's Baroness Cox, who's famous for an anti-Muslim film. So you get groups like the Quilliam Foundation, thankfully it's gone now, had links with Baroness Cox and the EDL, Tommy Robinson, literally. There's another British Muslims, again, there's links, work together, one law for all. So what's the effects of this Islamophobia? The problem is that because that drip feed of Islamophobia is so constant in the media, it affects how Muslims are perceived. Even if you don't consciously think about it, at a subconscious level, it affects you. So when a Muslim goes for a job interview, or is a defendant in court, or is stopped by the police, or is speaking to a child's teacher at school, both men and women are affected in those sorts of ways. And of course, what it causes is a lot of violence as well. So Muhammad Salim, 82 years old, stabbed to death walking home from a mosque in Birmingham. He was killed by a white racist. He actually had 3 bomb attacks on mosques. One was a nail bomb. It was just very fortunate no one died. He got the timing wrong. Another guy, Muhsin Ahmed, 81 years old, murdered walking to the mosque in Rotherham. I mean, they're picking on elderly people who can't even fight back. They often pick on women as well, wearing scarves. They spit at them and so on. They're cowards. They really are. 58-year-old shot on the way to a mosque. 56-year-old Muslim nurse attacked in Stockport. Finsbury Park murder.
All UK.
Yeah, this is all UK. And of course, okay, I just want to go back to 1930s Germany and an election poster for the Nazi Party. And you can see this Teutonic sword and this Jewish snake being killed. You can see the Star of David on the head of the snake. But, unfortunately, there are snakelets that are coming out. And you won't be surprised to find that what some of them say. So one of them says usury and the other one says Bolshevism. So you've got communists and you've got bankers, basically, the two opposites of the extremes opposite of the spectrum, but they attack both. Then there's lies, deception, white slavery. So, you know, sex keeps coming up. They use it all the time. Der Stürmer often used to have cartoons of Jewish people taking advantage of, you know, white Germanic girls. Terror, Jewish people causing terror. All these things are being said about Muslims now. Civil war, that's one of the favorite tropes of these right-wingers. So violence. Okay, that was then, this is now. AFD. I had to censor that picture. This is Mauthausen concentration camp. They have a yearly commemoration there, marking the deaths and the abuse that went on in the concentration camp. There was some neo-Nazi graffiti on there recently, and it was, "For them, the Jews, for us, the Muslims." So Nazism hasn't died in Germany. It's still there, and the rise of AfD is really worrying. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. I had an appendix, but I'm not going to go into